Coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. I'm Kate.
And I'm Laura. And this week we're finishing off our conversation about Dad Luke with a discussion about how Lorelai reacted to the news and how Luke and Lorelai as a couple navigated the situation together. Spoiler alert, it was not good. Things did not go well.
They went the opposite of well. But before we get into all of that, this is your weekly reminder. This is a Spoilers All podcast. We're spoiling some big stuff here, folks. If you really don't want to know, if we've already said too much, it might be time to jump ship now. So, we can't be held liable for what we say from here on out. And if you could quickly do all those YouTube-y things, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, drop us a comment, share this video with your friends. All engagement really helps us out.
It does indeed. But let's just dive right in because I know you and I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, and rightly so. This is some pretty heavy news that was disclosed and not in proper timing. We're going to get to all of it, but where would you like to start?
Let's start with maybe a big question, I guess. But why do you think Luke didn't tell her right away?
I don't know. And that's maybe one of the most truthful answers I can give. This is heavy news. It's a child that's coming into your life that is biologically yours that you did not know about for over a decade. Because as we said in the previous 2 episodes, Anna was not a great human being for withholding that information for as long as she did. So I can fully understand needing time to wrap your mind around that. It's not like, finding out that, I don't know, like, just it's a big thing. I can't even think of something smaller to like just reference, but so I can understand not immediately picking up the phone 0.5 seconds later to be like, hey, guess what? And needing to maybe even just take a day to just let it sink in for yourself. But for 2 months to go by and for nothing to be said, I can't even find a way to excuse it. And I'm just going to immediately pull it out.
Yeah, I don't have mine handy, so you're waving the red flag for the both of us. But yes, I can understand needing a couple days to be like, just to sit with it, to think about it, to sort out your own feelings without too much outside interference. But 2 months is just inexcusable. This is the person that you're supposedly in love with, that you should trust with every fiber of your being, someone you intend to legally tie yourself to, who will be the step parent of this child. 2 months, even for someone who's as slow at emotional processing as Luke Danes, like that's a new land speed record for like slowest emotional processing of all time. And it's just, like I said, inexcusable. And as to the rationale, I feel like part of it was just Lorelai's sheer force of personality. I feel like this is one of the few things, besides Luke just being emotionally ill-equipped to handle things, I think Lorelai's charisma comes a lot from just her sheer force of personality, right? I think and this is after we find out about April, but Lorelai doesn't know better yet. But think about the Perfect Dress episode when Lorelai whooshes into the diner, fittingly enough, and it's just like, the wedding planning's done. I have a dress. I found a venue. They're having a special. We found a caterer. They're having a special. The carousel will be ready. I picked out your suit. All you have to do is go get measured for it. Like, just bulldozing sometimes into people's lives and just being a whirlwind of noise and emotion and energy that can be really hard for people to deal with. And, sometimes this comes out directly at Luke, and he knows that she is so strong in that way that it's not even just about April and how April reacts to that. But I think it's also about Luke being worried that Lorelai's strong personality will worm its way in. Like, that her opinions and feelings will start to overtake his if he tells her and starts getting input from her about this. I'm not sure if initially his thought was that, he says it to her when she wants to help with the party, and he's looking at the toiletry kit through the window of a store, and he's just like, I think that would be the perfect birthday gift. I think she would like that. And Lorelai's like, no, that's a terrible gift. Like, it's not right. Even though she hasn't really met the kid yet. And who knows, maybe April would be thrilled with the toiletry set like that. But, she's like, let me be a part of it. Let me help you with this. And he's like, no, because the minute I do, the minute you're in her life, it's over for me. And so there's this deep insecurity in him that his role and his self will be overshadowed by her huge personality. And so he's kind of getting it from both sides. He's worried about her influencing him and also being so dazzling and fabulous that April just gloms onto her magnetically, and he won't have as strong of a relationship with her after that. I think it's kind of insane, but that's where his head is at. And so I don't think it's right necessarily, but I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I'm sensing a theme here with parents of children who are just way too possessive over the child in terms of, I want to be your son and your sole influence, and all you see is me. Like Lorelai with Rory, we've talked about it. Anna and April. I don't think there are differing reasons here with Luke and April. I don't think it's, on par with those other two. But still, what is it about having your child develop this mindset where it's like, all I see is you? No, like, let it be a 2-parent household. Let it be just, again, the whole concept of it takes a village. Like, you can't just be so locked in on, just that concept of, I want to be everything to my kid and not have them lean on anybody else. It's so unhealthy. And I don't like, it's obviously a theme again within this show. I just don't understand why Luke has that mindset. And again, you've known Lorelai for years and years and years at this point, even if your romantic relationship hasn't, spanned that entire time frame. And so I agree, he's very much aware of her strong-willed personality and how much of a charmer she can be and how she just draws people in, and people just seem to, innately just like her. But what's the problem there? Like, this is the woman that you're heading towards marriage with. Like, she's going to be a part of your kid's life if you do marry her, and you spend the rest of your lives together, however long that marriage lasts. So at some point, whether it's now, whether it's 6 months from now, whether it's a year from now, you've got to bring this person into your kid's life. So I understand, like, the reticence of just needing to cope with that information as it's being unfolded to you. But you need to start directly taking those steps to say, okay, I've processed this. I've told my partner I need them to start having interactions together because these two people both mean a lot to me in my life. They're both going to be an active part of my life for a very long time. So I need them to also start being able to bond and get to know each other as well, and take those steps and have that familiarity. But for Luke to just say, Lorelai is going to exist over here and just in this corner of my life and in this room, and April will exist over here, and they never need to be brought together, it's abhorrently wrong. And even Emily, notices, because she tells Lorelai, like, the sooner you can start being a part of that kid's life, the better it is going to be. And she is 1,000% right.
Yeah, Luke cops to that when they're in the hay bale maze. Later, he says, like, I was compartmentalizing. I think that's what you call it, and I need to learn to open up my compartments. And he's right about that. He really was keeping both aspects of his life walled off for some reason. I'm not sure that it goes to the same reasons as Anna and April and Lorelai and Rory, because I think those are codependent relationships. In this case, I think it's more just like April will lose interest in me when, someone as fabulous as Lorelai is right there. Because like she won't want to spend time with me anymore, because how can I compare to this woman who is so effervescent and, and lovable, and he doesn't see that in himself, and he doesn't have confidence in the strength yet of his relationship with his daughter for it to be able to withstand that. And once again, I think it's mostly coming out of his insecurity, and it's not necessarily rooted in reality. But I can also kind of see where he's coming from, where it's just like it is hard to do anything with Lorelai. Chris says it to Rory in the revival, like, your mother is a force of nature. Like, have you met her? She is a whirlwind, and she will sweep you away in that. And so I can kind of sympathize with his fears a little bit, but also just still want to smack him upside the head and be like, it doesn't matter. Like, find a way through it. Just, figure it out, because the answer is not to compartmentalize. But going back to what you said about Emily, I'm also not so sure if she's right, because I think maybe she's oversimplifying. She's once again got a little bit of a finger on the pulse, being like, something is off here, and the fact that like you're struggling to integrate is probably a red flag. But I also think that there's not necessarily a timeline on when a prospective step parent should meet a child. I think it's entirely situationally dependent. And, it's been a couple of months. It's been probably like 4 or 5 months at that point by the time they have that conversation. And so it's like, it's not an inappropriate time necessarily to start making those introductions. But I also don't think you should be like, well, it's been X amount of time and we still haven't done it, so time's up, clock's over. Like, it has to be right for everyone involved, and for Emily to assume that she knows that they're at that stage where it's the right timing to make those introductions and to start to integrate things. She doesn't really know the situation. I mean, and she blames it on Lorelai as well. She's like, I know your handiwork when I see it, which I also think is unfair, because Lorelai is just trying to do what Luke has asked of her. Luke wants that time to bond with April, to figure this out, to get his legs under him in this new phase of life that he's suddenly been thrust into. And she just wants to give him the space that he's requested, which is generally a nice thing to do. And so for Emily to spin it around and pin blame on Lorelai when it's Luke who's driving this car isn't fair.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that I'm gonna go to bat for Emily here a little bit. I think she was just on the whole trying to say, like, not that this should have happened, last week or last month, or, if it doesn't happen within the next 5 minutes, it's like game over. I just think that she is smart enough to recognize the importance of April and Lorelai starting to have even semi-regular interactions with one another and just slowly building that relationship. It doesn't need to go from 0 to 100, nor should it. But I think she was just recognizing Luke is going to be a very present and long-term partner in your life. April's going to be a significant and lifelong person in his life now that he's a dad. So it's important to start just taking those even baby steps, just to, get coffee together for 10 minutes one day, and just start slowly having those interactions to build that relationship. And I think that what you said about Luke is 100% correct. He was definitely very nervous about April's going to like her so much more than she likes me, and it's going to hinder my ability to really bond with my daughter. But you need to find a way to work through that insecurity and recognize and put a little bit of trust in your kid that she is still just always going to appreciate you and love you as her father, even if there's another step parent now in the mix.
Yeah, I will say that Emily is predominantly correct in the situation, in that, like, she makes the excellent points that, like, They're going to be husband and wife, and this girl is his blood relation. Lorelai is going to be in her life for the rest of her life, assuming that she and Luke stay together forever, right? And that, yeah, they do need to embrace that fact. Again, I will just reiterate that she should not dictate the timeline because she's not involved, and she should also not blame Lorelai when Luke has a stronger hand in it. But yeah, she's on to something with just the fact that Lorelai is playing it too hands off, and that comes out of Luke and his requests. And so what do you think about that in terms of... Actually, maybe let's back up a little bit before we get to that, and hopefully I'll remember to come back around to it. But like, when Lorelai comes into the diner, she sees April there, and she's refilling the salt and pepper shakers, and she just sees a kid who claims that her father owns the place, and she's like, excuse me? And she has a conversation with Luke, and she finds out how long it's been. What did you make of all that? Like, how did you feel when Lorelai found out?
I felt sad for her. I mean, it was definitely an unexpected moment, not how she foresaw, just stepping into the diner that day to go. But I try and put myself in her shoes and think, how would you feel? And I would just probably, the emotional range at that point in time was probably just extreme in terms of questioning, why hasn't my partner told me? Why couldn't they trust me with this information? Potentially, if I want to continue on in this relationship, now I'm going to have to factor in a stepchild. Is that something that I want? I never signed up for that when I entered into this relationship. Granted that I didn't know this person existed, and neither did my partner. He wasn't withholding purposefully. He just found out not too long ago himself. But it's a lot to contend with in that moment. So I'm sure she was just overwhelmed with the thought process of like, what is going to happen next now in my relationship with Luke? April aside, like, there are some pretty serious questions now that are going to have to start being asked with my partner, and some very serious conversations that are going to have to happen. And I feel sad for her because I think Luke also definitely recognized in that moment, I messed up a little bit, and I probably should have told her a lot sooner than I did. And I think we see a lot of remorse on his face and as well, but also with his tone and how he starts speaking to her, when they have that interaction. And she's just like, well, how long did you know? Why didn't you tell me? And I think even Luke is contending with the fact of just realizing, I should have told her a lot sooner. And the fact that I withheld this now is hurting her a lot as well. And it's going to be something that is just, there's a trust break there in that moment, I think, with that. Is it irreparable? Can it be repaired? Those are some of the serious conversations that we're going to have moving forward. But I just predominantly felt for her in that moment because it was just a gobsmacked realization that she now has to contend with that is going to affect her relationship. And again, they were able to work through it. But in all likelihood, there were a lot of scenarios where that could have just been what ended it as well. And that's a very scary thought too, just thinking like, oh my gosh, like this could be what breaks us up. And that's just another thing to have to work through in that moment. There's just so much there.
Yeah, Luke expresses that to Liz at Thanksgiving. And he's like, she asks him, what did Lorelai say? And he just stays silent. And she's like, oh, you haven't told her. And then he says, we're doing great, Lorelai and I, and this could wreck it. And Liz says, only if you let it. And that's exactly kind of what he did. Even with that warning, he should have said something much sooner. Even if he didn't have every answer and a solid relationship built, like, you don't need to like have everything figured out before talking about it. That's not the right way to do that. And then Lorelai goes to Rory and also says, what does this say about our relationship? You know, I get that he was confused and I'm confused too, but what does it mean that he would keep a secret like this? That he could keep that he kept and could keep a secret like this. What does it say about him? What does it say about me? Doesn't he trust me? Why doesn't he trust me? And so not only do you have the questions about step parenting and, you know, these bigger relationship questions, but you have more fundamental trust problems now blooming in this relationship. Questions about the nature of your bond and how trustworthy you are, how forthcoming the other person is, why there might be a disconnect in communication. And like those are scary questions to have to ask as well. And it's just like you said, there's a lot there. It's very rough. It kind of makes you question like what else is he hiding? And we know not much else, but it's such a, like you said, heavy emotional thing for them. And it gets very dicey from here. I also love when she goes to tell Suki that the wedding has been postponed at the flower market in the morning. And she's like, Luke has a kid. And Suki says, a kid like a goat?
Yeah.
It's like one of the best lines.
What did you think about, I feel like it's so important to highlight the fact that in the aftermath of this, Lorelai was relying on Rory, but also Suki for support, just having to work through this emotion and all of these thoughts now. And what do you think about her going to Suki in that moment? And essentially for me, it was just, I need my best friend at this point to help me work through this. I'm going to need, you know, that feminine support, you know, aside from Rory as well, you know, to just try and counsel me through this. How do you feel about that interaction with her and Suki and how Suki responds to the news as well and the advice that she gives Lorelai?
It's kind of painful, frankly, because Lorelai breaks the news about the postponement. And it's another person who turns it back on Lorelai unjustly because she's like, why do you do this? Why do you make yourself miserable? As if Lorelai is the one who's having cold feet and trouble committing. And I mean, Suki says it before. She's like, you've got priors. So it's, you know, I guess not out of the realm of possibility given Lorelai's history, but jumping to conclusions and saying, what did you do? And being accusatory in that moment is not helpful to anyone. So I wish she had been like, just open instead and been like, please tell me what's wrong. Like, tell me what's up. As opposed to jumping to, why do you want to be miserable? That's not a good friend thing to do or say. As to the actual advice, I feel like her advice is don't cancel everything yet because Luke will eventually get his head screwed on straight. And it sets up these unrealistic expectations and it makes the timeline feel tighter for Lorelai. And it might actually have caused some of her distress at the like, why is this taking so long? Like, oh my God, June 3rd is creeping up. And it might have put unnecessary pressure on the whole situation. So it's like, but I do love that she's like, what if Jackson has a love child out there? And then there's like the suggestion that it's one of the kids in the town who talks kind of like Jackson.
Oh boy,
that was hilarious.
Yeah, in an AU. We'll get out.
Could you imagine? Oh yeah, we need. Where's that kid? I need that kid. A kid like a goat.
It's just like all of a sudden, like Suki's walking by some like random Stars Hollow house, and she just sees like a kid in the backyard who is just like weirdly obsessing about like the tomatoes that they're growing, and she's like, that has to be the one. That's not normal behavior in a child. Look at it.
Yeah. I also like that Suki asks, you know, how he's handling it, and Suki's like, drinking? Xanax? No, he's trying to be a father, and I applaud that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you like? Did you think of any other reaction to what Suki did?
I agree that she definitely had room there to be a better friend. As much as Lorelai, and I think we all know, you know, she can and she will bolt at times from situations and from men and from partnerships in her life when she like is just afraid of something or is just, too scared to commit. She very much has those deer in the headlight moments where she will just completely avoid a situation or an encounter because it's just not something that she can handle. And as much as Suki knows that about her best friend, I think she needed to counsel her a little bit differently here and just say, like, hey, this is about Luke right now. It's about you, but it's about how he is processing, and he is not processing well. But you're essentially here not doing anything abhorrently wrong. And so for her to say, like, oh, well, this is you, Lorelai. This is how you behave. Like, you're doing this to yourself. No, she's not. She's just on the receiving end of Luke's inability to cope right now and process. And that's not her fault. She's just having to deal with like the residual effects of that. So Suki should have definitely had like eyes wide opened a little bit more to the situation and say, like, Luke is just in need of some serious counsel here. Give him the time and the patience that he might need, but you're not wrong in this scenario. And just maybe try and be a little bit more supportive, especially when now their potential marriage is falling apart. The wedding is no longer going to happen. That's also really devastating. And I think just Suki failed to recognize a lot of the emotion and the heartache that her best friend was going through.
You know what they say about when you assume? I don't know. It's some stupid American phrase. Something about a donkey.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She assumed and made an ass. Anyway. Yeah. All right. Moving forward in time a little bit. Lorelai's sort of stuck in purgatory for a while, just knowing that April is visiting the diner, but, April's like gonna be here till 3 tomorrow. Okay, then I guess I'll come sometime after 3. And literally being on the outside looking in when she's in the soda shop and staring through the glass, and everybody is crowding around and everybody's asking questions that she doesn't know the answer to, but they all seem to assume that she knows what's happening and she doesn't. And Luke doesn't see her in that crowd because she leaves just before he looks over. And then he says to her later, like, don't they respect that I'm trying to build a relationship with my daughter? And, it's uncomfortable to feel like everybody has their eyes on this. So Luke feels uncomfortable, and Lorelai is made to feel uncomfortable by that too. And so she's constantly playing this game of tug of war of like, I want to be a part of this. It's really hard for me to just watch as an observer, especially when Luke and I are supposed to share stuff like this. Like, this is supposed to be the name of the game. And it goes on for a while.
Yeah.
So this kind of goes back to the question of like what we were talking about with Emily, which is like, when would the appropriate time be for Lorelai to have been brought into this?
I think that from the time that April made her existence known in Luke's life, and we have the whole interaction with her getting a piece of his hair, the paternity test coming back to show that he's the father, he visits the science fair at the middle school and learns of this information. Again, every person is going to process differently, but I would say in general, for any partner to have found that out and to be on the cusp of marriage with another person, I wouldn't say that it's excusable for that information to not be disclosed within 3 days-ish. I hate putting like a number on it and saying like it has to be 3 days, but I think 2 months is definitely absolutely not. Again, 5 minutes later, also no, you need to like let that sink in. But if, again, in Luke and Lorelai's situation, you're progressing towards marriage with this person, I can't just excuse Luke not having told Lorelai within the first few days of that information coming to light. And I think anyone in their particular scenario, that's also the time frame that I would give.
What about when it comes to actually having them meet and having Lorelai be a part of April's life?
Mm-hmm. That's also a conversation that, Anna needs to be brought in for as well, because there's going to be a new step parent in your daughter's life. I think the three of them definitely needed to have a sit down and say, when do we want these interactions to start? What do we want those initial interactions to look like? What is the goal here now for the three of us as parents raising this kid? I would love to see a conversation like that between those three adults maybe happen a week or two later. And then maybe within the span of like the first month, there's an initial meeting between Lorelai and April. So I would say once all three parents, so to say, have met up and had that discussion within the first month, I would say there should be an initial meeting, especially, again, considering that Luke and Lorelai are progressing towards marriage and the relationship is as serious as it is. It's not like they've just been on 1 or 2 dates and they haven't even put a name to their relationship yet. It's much more progressed than that. So my answer would be within a month of all of this coming to light.
That feels a little fast for me. I would give them a little bit more time. I think what needs to happen, given the situation, is Luke does need to prove himself independently, prove that he is a man of his word, that he can handle his time with April appropriately, that things are going well with them. But I absolutely agree that Anna needs to be brought into this. I think if Luke had been able to talk to Anna about Lorelai much sooner, a lot of this trouble could have been avoided. I don't want to put a specific date on it, but he should have been having conversations with Anna that were something along the lines of like, I'm in a committed partnership. We've been friends for a long time and have been together for a long time. We're engaged. We're heading towards marriage. And obviously, I eventually want her to be part of April's life if that's something you're comfortable with. And I need to know what the terms are for you. They need to have a conversation about, like what you said, how this is going to go down, when it's going to happen, in what stages. And they need to be all on the same page about parenting, basically, not just about meetings, but, other parenting questions. It's a good thing for step parents to have conversations with bio parents and exes. When families try to blend, there's always going to be things that need to be discussed and negotiated beforehand to make sure that the experience of the child is not full of conflict and is consistent across the board. So it's not like, their mom is a hard ass, but stepmom is the fun parent, just the sort of expectation setting. So there's the side where he has to do it with Anna, but he also needs to be talking to Lorelai more. Again, he doesn't need to directly bring her in too fast, because I do appreciate that, if April had been in his life longer, then I'd be like, no. But he barely knows this kid. He needs to build a relationship with her first and figure out their dynamic before trying to mediate a third person within that, especially a person with as strong of a personality as Lorelai, who will probably just try to come in and take over, especially because we've seen Lorelai have the tendency to insert herself into other people's problems and situations and make her feelings known. Like when Jess came to town and she tried to tell Luke what was up because she's raised a kid, she feels like she's got the answers. And I mean, granted, she has more experience than Luke, but Rory and April, despite superficial similarities, are not the same person. And so she can't assume that, she's automatically just going to step in and be great and that everything's going to go swimmingly because, this is a whole different can of worms, a whole different situation. And so I really wish I had seen more openness from Luke about talking about his relationship with April and giving Lorelai some sense of comfort from his disclosures, and also from saying like, things are going really well. I don't have an exact timeline on it yet, but I definitely feel like we're moving closer to being able to integrate you, being able to say that he's spoken to Anna and that, that these things are in motion. It doesn't have to be happening tomorrow for her to feel like, okay, I can breathe now. She just needs to know that there's forward progression. And she never gets any of that. When she goes to give him the ultimatum, she's like, or no, it's after that when she's talking to Suki. She's like, I was holding onto the bumper and he was dragging me along. You know, she was trying to make her opinions known sometimes. And at other times, she was just completely keeping her mouth shut. So she doesn't need to give all kinds of parenting advice all the time or try to dictate decisions, but she should also communicate her feelings and be like, look, I understand that you're not quite ready to introduce us, but I need a little more direction, more communication, more openness about this because I'm starting to fear what this means for us because, you know, I'm still not in the loop.
Yep. And therein lies the exact problem. And it was the next point that I was going to make. So I'm glad that we're on the same wavelength. Lorelai, in a way, dug her own grave leading up to that ultimatum because it was good that she was respecting that Luke needed time. But I've used this before, and I will just use this metaphor again. She was putting a clamp on her feelings in a way where it's like you're trying to bury a landmine, and this is going to blow up on you if you just internalize all of that and you don't communicate how you're feeling. And I think what you said is absolutely correct. She needed to start communicating to Luke like, hey, I understand you're not ready for a full-on interaction yet or a 100% presence in her life, but can we start talking about when those steps can be taken, what we're going to do to work towards that? Because I am feeling that we're just stagnant here and you're just going to continue to pursue your relationship with your daughter. Our relationship is going to get put on the back burner. It's not going to go anywhere. And I can't have that. I need us to continue to progress at the same time that you're continuing to progress to with your daughter. It can't be, I'm on hold, April's 100%. There needs to be a balance here. And I think Lorelai needed to communicate that she was in need of that balance from Luke. But because she didn't say it, Luke, again, is just the man didn't know any better. And so he was not really recognizing how his partner was struggling with kind of being put on hold within that relationship, but needing that forward progression to happen. And because she left it unsaid for so long, it blows up with that ultimatum. And that's something where that could have been avoided too, just with better communication.
Yeah, I always thought it was so disappointing that Luke wasn't able to multitask and do two things at once with with maintaining his relationship with Lorelai. It just seems like not just on the April front, but it seems like their relationship stagnates. And you know, it's just ironically enough for someone with a personality like her, she's kowtowing to him the whole time. And anytime she tries to speak up, she is roundly shot down. And it seems like they're not spending as much time together. He's not paying as much attention to her. And he's completely consumed by this other thing and is unable to achieve that balance. And it's just like, why? Like, if you were going to marry her anyway and this relationship is solid, like, again, you're only shooting yourself in the foot by not following through with that commitment because you're letting this other stuff get in the way of it. You know, you're the one who is experiencing this block that you need to work through, and you're not working through it. You're just letting it sit there and hoping that her feelings will change. And that's another thing. He had a hard time perspective taking. He was so wrapped up in his own thoughts and feelings that, like, it's hard to tell if he even really thought about it too hard or tried to think what Lorelai's reaction would be beyond just his fear that it would ruin their relationship. You know, like, it's, from what I see, mostly his guilt about, like, oh, I should do this. It's, you know, it's got to get onto that eventually. But we only have that one moment of telling Liz about it and his fears about their relationship, but we don't seem to get any other explanations or talks from him to someone else, a third party that he can trust, about his current feelings after that initial WTF reaction. Like, and any reflection on, I wonder how Lorelai is taking this, And he never asks her how she's taking it. It's all about his feelings. And granted, it's a huge thing and it predominantly is his problem. But once you're about to get married to someone, that, it's no longer just you. You're building a life with this person and they need to be a part of every part of your life. You can't just, like, obviously everyone has like their own interests and stuff, and not everybody has to spend every waking moment together. But a child is not a hobby, This is a far deeper and more substantial commitment than just like, I don't want to go ice fishing with you, Luke. That's insane, And so I wish he had been able to externalize a little bit and be like, maybe I need to think about, Lorelai's feelings in all of this a little bit more.
Yeah, he just really needed to, at the end of the day, find a better balance with all of this. And it doesn't even need to be a 50-50 split right off the bat. But it was 100 and it was 0. And that's where Lorelai was really struggling with how their relationship was just not going any further at that point in time. And I think she was just even like, just give me 90-10 and then give me 80-20. I understand you need time with your kid and it's going to be a slow build to get back to a 50-50 result. And then, us being a part of each other's lives where then everything is balanced because we're now all actively a part of each other's lives and living together. But because there wasn't even like a 90-10 split, that's where Lorelai, I think, was just so frustrated, and rightly so. But she should have communicated it. Luke needed to know better without having to have been told, but that's where we were, and that's what led to what we get here.
Yeah. All right, switching gears a little bit. How do we feel about when Rory goes to Anna's store to sort of like spy on her and see what her deal is? How did you take that scene?
No, we don't need to. We don't need to do that. I think it was probably just almost doing like Lorelai's bidding a little bit too much. I think she was probably just, obviously there for intel because she's curious herself. But I feel like Lorelai and Anna are not even so regularly a part of each other's lives yet. And not that that's what Rory is going there for. But I feel like her presence when Lorelai and Luke are still trying to work things out, when these 3 people are still trying to figure out how they're going to potentially parent April together, I don't think it was right for Rory to be going there in that moment and kind of forcing the situation to potentially really pick up the pace and speed up further. Because, obviously she goes in and Anna doesn't know who she is initially. But when that comes to light, to me, it's such an awkward situation. And I don't think it was something that was warranted or necessary. I think Rory just needed to almost mind her own business a little bit more in that regard and not overstep. And I really feel like it was just a bit too invasive for me.
I don't think I feel as strongly as you do that it was super invasive. There's always the plausible deniability card. It's like, I was just out shopping. I don't know what you're talking about. Right. Oh, wow, what a coincidence. You're April's mom. I've been to your store. You could totally play it off and be like, oh, what are the odds? But yeah, and especially considering Lorelai was so against it. Lorelai was not for her getting that intel. She's like, this is Luke's thing. Like, leave it alone. Use your evil genius for something else, okay? But I don't know. To me, it just, the fact that it even had to happen, or that Rory felt it necessary because her mother wasn't dealing with this. I wish, if I were Anna, I would have been like, I need to meet your girlfriend, or I need to meet your fiance. Like, let's sit down and have a coffee. Let's get to know each other. And I feel like she would have felt so much better about Lorelai being a part of her daughter's life on a shorter timeline, maybe, if she knew anything about her and realized how much they had in common, that they were both single moms with brilliant daughters and absent dads. And, just seeing how delightful Lorelai is as a person, hearing about her in Stars Hollow and how much she's beloved in that town, how much she does volunteer work and is part of the community, and just, how much this woman could bring to her daughter's life. But instead, she just sort of has this very hands-off mentality of like, it's Luke and my kid, and it's me and my kid. This other woman is like, whatever. If it were me, I would need to know something about the stepmom, the potential stepmom. I'd be like, I need to meet this woman ASAP. And once I have, then we'll start talking about the possibility of integration, because I need more info on this. And the fact that Anna and Lorelai don't meet until after the birthday party, and it's already sort of like too late, and Lorelai has thrown herself into this kid's life in a surprising way to Anna. She's like, this was not part of the plan. It was supposed to be you throwing her this party, and you had your girlfriend do it. And, it created this resentment, and it broke the trust that Luke was trying to build with Anna. And at the end of the day, that was one of the things that brought the whole thing down, especially because I'd said this in, I think it was last week's episode, that I think what Anna said to her when they met that first time about, when you're married, we'll talk about it. I think that was part of the thing that really pushed Lorelai over the edge, because now she had a second source of pressure about the whole situation. She's like, well, nothing's going to get better until we're married. And that put an even tighter timeline on things for her. So not only had she neglected to tell Luke that she didn't cancel the wedding, but Anna was like, well, when you're married, then we can talk about this. I think that was the wrong order to do things in. I think it was too important for them to establish that this was going to be a workable dynamic in the first place. Once they're married, barring a divorce, you're stuck with this woman now, If Luke is going to continue to be a part of April's life, you need to know this woman before they get hitched, and you need to determine your comfort level before you now have a legally binding contract that's going to be hard to exit.
Yeah. And just the best way I can summarize all of it with all of these people, it's not just Lorelai, it's not just Luke, it's not just Anna. There's just a lack of confrontation and an avoidance for confrontation. And I understand how some of these conversations can be very scary to have, because they're heavy ones, but they're necessary ones. They're vital ones. They're so crucial, like you said, to have happen before a marriage occurs, because you have a minor child that is being affected by this union now and by all of these choices that are being made. And you have to consider April here the most. She's going to be largely affected by everything that happens moving forward, especially if she starts getting attached to Lorelai. And it's one of the things that's highlighted as well. What if she gets attached and then your relationship doesn't work out? My kid's going to be devastated. I don't want to put her through that if it's not going to be a reality. But again, it just stems from, y'all need to talk to each other, especially when it's your potential lifelong partner. Communicate. And if you're even afraid to communicate with your partner, that's probably even a larger concern that you need to address. But you just need to talk to people and just be open with the people that you seem to love and trust most in your life. And if you can't do that, again, there's a lot that's wrong there that needs to be addressed.
Can you say therapy?
Therapy.
5 times fast.
For everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's back up a little bit. I want to talk about the birthday party a little bit more. We talked about it from, the perspective that Anna had about it. But how do you feel about Lorelai being thrown into the mix here? How do you feel about the fact that Luke only called on her in a moment of desperation? And also, how do you feel about the fact that she turned the party into a sleepover. And also the other thing that gets me, and I want to know your feelings on, is how do you feel about the fact that she swapped out Luke's gift? And he was like, initially he asked her opinion on the toiletry kit. She said it was a bad idea. He bought it anyway. He changed his mind as soon as she was opening gifts and was like, oh man, this is going to be embarrassing. And then we find out that she has gotten her a book and a gift card instead and swapped the tags on stuff to help Luke save face. And yeah, so she really threw herself into this party. How do you feel about what she did there and what Luke did there?
Mm-hmm. I'm generally okay with Luke reaching out to Lorelai for help in that moment, just because, again, I think he knew, this is someone who has raised a teenage girl. Rory not too many years ago was the same age that April is now. She's going to know what it's going to take to make this party successful and what preteen and teenage girls are going to want, So I think that even if their relationship was not a thing, even if they were just, still just basic friends at that point in time, I think he was just reaching out to someone that he knew well enough and trusted well enough, but just knew was going to know like what a girl that age was going to want and what was going to make for a fun party. So I'm okay with him contacting her and just saying, I need help with this. I think not just Luke, but any guy in that scenario, it's like, you're not going to necessarily be super familiar with the mind of a preteen girl. It's a thing. So I'm okay with that. The swapping of the gifts. Nope. No.
It's not as cool.
Was the toiletry kit like probably the worst idea ever? Yes. Should it have been allowed to play out? Also, yes. Because this is how Luke is going to learn. This is how he's going to know what his daughter likes, what she doesn't like. I'm sure that April, like, she's not a jerk. I'm sure she would have been gracious enough in that moment to have been like, thank you, Dad. I appreciate this. It's the thought that counts. He got me something. And then maybe April and Luke can have a conversation later, if he picks up on like, oh, she doesn't really love it, or April can say like, hey, thank you. I really appreciate this, but I'm more interested in maybe like books or, in just museum artifacts or just, something more in line with like what she would appreciate, and she can communicate that. And then that's going to allow them to, again, bond, get to, like, Luke's going to know what his daughter likes a little bit better, but he needs to have that trial and error. And that's what that, I think, gift would have been. So I think it was, again, in Lorelai's mind, probably well-intended to try and swap it out to allow for April to have a present that she was going to really love. But I don't think it was her place or her right to do that at that moment in time. I think she just needed to let the gift be given and let Luke learn from that situation.
It would have been a strong lesson and just I don't know. I could kind of see Lorelai in her head being like, ha ha, I was right. And there might have been some odd satisfaction in that for her. But I think I had to Santa's Secret Stuff when they're at I don't know, it's the Discovery store probably. And Luke has gotten her a rock polisher, but her grandma got her one first. And so they're going to change it for a microscope. And April's like, my dad's always been a good gift giver. And we know, as the audience, that that's not true. That Lorelai has helped in the past. Seemingly not with Rory's gifts, because he kept getting her stuff with monograms and unicorns. But, with Rachel, we definitely saw how much she hopped in there. And so it almost sets I don't want to say a bad precedent necessarily, but like it makes it so that it's now what she's done for him instead of what he's able to do for himself. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Sometimes it is a process of trial and error with stuff like that. I mean, in a way it's good because I feel like both Luke and April might have been embarrassed in that moment, and it did save some embarrassment. Like, imagine being 13 years old and you're having a fun party with your friends and you go to open that gift and you're like, a trash can covered in kittens. Thanks, Dad. I feel like it might have been kind of embarrassing for April, too, to get a gift that's so awkward from her dad so publicly. But I still, in principle, agree with you that it wasn't Lorelai's place to do that. I think, again, it just so much could have been fixed if Luke would have allowed her input beforehand. You know, if he had been open to her suggestions, if not her presence, if he had been like, you know, you have a daughter, what would you do for a birthday party? Because letting her provide ideas and input and creativity will make her feel like a part of the process, so that you can put off that meeting a little bit longer because she feels involved, even if she's not meeting the kid yet. It's all about, you know, doing that integration slowly and intentionally, and making your partner feel like a part of your life. Because when you separate it like that, it leads to resentment and anger. You could tell how disappointed she was when Luke was not listening to her about the toiletry kit being wrong. I mean, granted, the way that the scene was written was sort of like Lorelai being judgmental about it, and nobody likes to hear that they're wrong or that their instincts are off. You know, Luke thinks he knows April and he wants to prove that he knows April. And, you know, so for Lorelai to be like, no, like to make him feel bad just deepens that insecurity, which perpetuates the problem. So the whole thing was awkward, but if he had just been open to her feedback and her input, so much of this could have been anticipated instead of reacted to after the fact, and it wouldn't have been such a catastrophe, especially in Anna's eyes. It turned out to be a fustercluck in the end because of that.
Yeah, and I think doing exactly what you said would have allowed Luke to save face, because he would have still come off well to April and her friends, like, oh, you know, your dad's awesome, rad birthday party, got you a super cool gift, you know, everything was great. And so Luke saves face, and it allows, like you said, Lorelai to feel comfortable with the level of, you know, involvement that she's being entrusted with at that time, where we're still not at the point where you can meet her and just be, you know, taking her out for, like, you know, girls' nights and dinners, but you're still, I'm slowly bringing you in and just allowing you to be involved in that way. I think that would have been a really wonderful balance. We didn't get it, and then that's what happens.
Yeah, that's making me think of an interesting connection, which is when Lorelai meets Sherry for the first time, and Sherry wants to have dinner with Rory and bond with Rory because she's about to theoretically marry Christopher. At least that's what they thought at the time. And Lorelai leaves it up to Rory. Then again, Rory's a little bit older, and they're definitely established in their relationships. But this is both of their first times meeting Sherry. And Lorelai's like, if it's okay with you, it's okay with me, and I'll even get you out a Friday night dinner for it. So, you know, Lorelai's openness to that, you know, despite her jealousy and her misgivings about certain things and her lack of disclosure to Christopher at times, like, it still feels like a step above, because at least she's, you know, she's letting Christopher and Sherry be a part of this, even if it makes her uncomfortable. So there's that. And then the other thing that comes to mind with all of this is the day after the party, when Lorelai is talking to Suki about it and, you know, being like, it was so much fun. April and I really bonded. Now I won't have to hide anymore. It makes me think that, like, this was one of the worst things that could happen, because it made Lorelai feel like it was a major breakthrough when it wasn't, because Luke, it was like 2 steps forward and 5 steps back, because Anna's reaction caused Luke to just completely put the brakes on everything. And that might have been more damaging to the relationship overall than if they had just taken the appropriate steps bit by bit and built to it, instead of just throwing Lorelai into the mix in a moment of of crisis. And I also hate that in that moment when she's talking to Suki, that she's so sanctimonious about it, where she's like, Luke just needed the time, and I'm so glad I gave it to him. Once again, Lorelai playing the magnanimous person when really she's been privately pushing all of her feelings down and bitching about it to everyone but Luke.
Yeah, but you make, like, it's just such a wonderful and fantastic point that you just made, and something that I hadn't really ever thought about. The whole 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. It was, I mean, I understand how Lorelai would leave that party and that encounter and the sleepover thinking, like, this is it. Breakthrough has happened. You know, Luke's going to be okay with this being a regular thing now. Didn't factor in Anna's response. And we've talked about how Anna's response was probably a bit too over the top. But I think it was also very naive for Lorelai to be thinking, like, we're, gravy now. We're just going to, be good moving forward. Everything's going to be fine. No, it was a very instantaneous breakthrough that maybe allowed you to, like, crack the shell, but, like, the egg is not fully hatched.
Yeah. Man, there's so many points at which this relationship, this whole dynamic could have been improved, and the whole thing feels so, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The ad hoc nature of it is just like everyone's off in their own little worlds doing things without other people, and it's creating all of this conflict. And I think it goes to show that communication and planning and intentionality is so important in this, because, like, again, it goes kind of back to what Christopher says in season 1, where he's like, I want to be a family. And Lorelai's like, you have no idea what it means to be a family. And this is another situation in which Lorelai also does not know what it means to be a family, because now she's not just marrying Luke. It's not just that Luke is going to be Rory's stepfather. And it's like, that's a whole other can of worms, where it's just like, what role do you foresee Luke having in Rory's life, especially now that she's like 20 or 21? Mm-hmm. It's a whole different ball game with a minor child now. And not long ago, I mean, I'm wearing my Stars Hollow Museum t-shirt because Luke wanted to buy the Twickham house for them so that they could have kids. And now this completely just like throws a whole wrench into that. It's just like, are you still going to have biological kids together of your own? Is April going to live with you part of the time? I mean, granted, that becomes a moot point when she moves to New Mexico, but it's like, this child is going to be residing with you at least part-time if you're going to move in together. And it seems like zero plans or thought was given to what the future and what daily life with each other would actually look like. And I'm going to use a word you used not long ago, naive. Just naive and short-sighted, myopic, if you will, for them to all just be like, oh, let's just see how it goes, instead of setting out a plan and talking to each other about, like, hey, how do we address this? Because, like, new territory, uncharted ground for all of us. How do we want to handle this with each other, and how can we keep each other in the loop at all times so that this is seamless and it progresses in a logical fashion?
Yeah. Again, all excellent points. It just really, I feel like I sound like a broken robot, but it really just, all of these points boil down to better communication is needed. All of you grow the F up. Be more mature in what you're expecting out of your relationships and your partnerships, and also have clear expectations and boundaries for how you're going to bring, again, minor children into someone else's life. All of this should have and could have been done so much better, but it wasn't. And so this is just, I mean, it's good television drama, which is, what we're here for. And a large part of it is probably truthful into the difficulties of bringing step parents into a stepchild's life. Like, it's a very common thing this day and age with, the divorce rate being what it is, people remarrying. So it's good to see represented on television. And again, the drama is there, but there's also a lot of really unhealthy coping mechanisms and lack of communication that we also should not be That's not the message that we should be sending to people who are trying to work through this themselves.
Yeah. Expectations and boundaries. Exactly. Just so well said. I'm going to move us ahead a little bit to the court episode and just point out that, ultimately it seems like it was Lorelai who helped Luke get the partial custody that he wanted. And so it was like Anna didn't lose necessarily, but she did have to concede to what he wanted in the situation. And it was Lorelai's moving, impassioned letter about his character and his consistency that really moved the needle, I think, because before then he was bursting out in court and, he had kind of his history against him with a short marriage and no stable relationships and a small apartment and, all these, the criminal record, just to name a few things that might have worked against him in a court evaluating his fitness for parenthood. And I think it was just a third party coming in from the outside and saying, look, he's a good guy and April will be better off for having him in her life. And I like that even though their relationship was contentious and hadn't fully been mended properly yet, that she was still willing to do that for him because she knew how much it meant. And yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. And I would like to think too, obviously in a situation like this, I'm sure that judge throughout the course of that entire process would have probably talked to April on his own, again, because it is in the best interest of the child. So you need to ask the child, like, what is it that you want? Do you want to live with mom? Do you want to live with dad? Would you be okay with an arrangement where you live with both of them and you can see both parents? And to have that judge weigh in what April wants as well. And I'm sure that Lorelai's letter was probably just backing up maybe a sentiment that April had already put forth herself, to say like, I love my mom, I appreciate my mom, but I love and appreciate my dad as well. And in the months that I've had to get to know him, he's been very active, he's been very present. He's done a lot of really great things for me, like throwing me a cool birthday party, taking me out to museums, planning trips for us, really showing that he cares. So I think the judge probably factored in that letter on top of what April had already put forth as her own desires as well. And I think that's probably what led to that decision.
I really hope so. April is old enough and intelligent enough to express her own emotions and desires on that front. And so I really do hope we don't get indication necessarily that she's submitted a letter or affidavit. Like a lot of times minors will be in family court decisions appointed a lawyer who acts as like an amicus curiae, a friend of the court, to speak on behalf of the child and to express their feelings to the court and to provide them sort of their own version of representation in the matter. We don't see I don't think any other lawyers in the court that appeared to speak on her behalf, but I think that would have been a nice touch. Then again, a lot of people don't know these things and they just write dramatic legal scenes in the way that they imagine them happening instead of how they really happen. And this is how we get TV shows like The Practice. But yeah, it's not like that in real life. But yeah, I truly hope that April's wishes were taken into consideration with all of that. Yeah, and just going back to the Luke and Lorelai of it all and the party and whatnot, you said that she could have helped Luke out behind the scenes and made him look good. And it just made me think that, like, they could have been a great team. I feel like partnerships are meant to be predicated on teamwork, No man is an island. Not even Lorelai Gilmore is an island. And if you're going to spend your life with someone, you need to work together towards shared goals. And so for Luke to keep Lorelai out and it be like, no, she's mine and my responsibility only, it cuts off that ability for teamwork where they could be stronger together. And you see it permeating all the way through to the revival, where they're still living together but feeling very much separate in the way they live their lives. And I guess, maybe that works for some people, and maybe it's why they're still together after 9 years, to have these two very independent people able to like coexist without biting each other's heads off. But I think that there are areas where doing that is not conducive to the best outcomes. And I think parenting is one of those things. And again, it goes back to like the fun parent versus the disciplinarian, the Claire versus Phil Dunphy of it all, they can be a team, but when they're sort of siloed and making decisions without each other, like, are their choices as good? There's the question, right? And so sometimes Luke needs to let Lorelai in and not fear what the reaction will be, or not fear that his own role or feeling will be diminished by that. They need to like lift each other up instead of it constantly being a power struggle within their own relationship to be like, who has control here?
Yeah. And it just goes back to Luke had a lot of insecurity, but he needed to let go of it. And if you're going to trust anybody with the insecurities that you're feeling and contending with, who better to trust than Lorelai Gilmore? I mean, it seems like that is Luke's go-to in terms of the one person that he would break down the walls for and just let in that regard. So I understand the insecurity that he felt, but he needed to find a way to work through that for Lorelai's behalf. And Lorelai is guilty of this as well. I mean, we saw her do it with Max. When Max posed her the question, well, what is my involvement going to be in Rory's life? And Lorelai was just like, none, she's fine. I mean, she's fully baked. We're good here. You don't need to parent or discipline. And if there is, a situation that warrants or merits discipline, I will handle it. Luke does a lot of the same with April, but even going into the revival, he's still living in the mindset of like, well, Rory's your kid, April is my kid, you take care of her, I'll take care of mine, and we'll coexist together on everything else and have mutual decisions within every other aspect of our lives, except for our kids. I guess it worked, but I just wouldn't call it the most healthy way to have approached that relationship.
It wouldn't be what I would choose,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to feel like, again, children are just so, if you have them, it's so central, I think, to your entire life, whether those kids live with you or not. Like, they become such a part of you and of your being, the way you think about the world and the way you interact with the world, that to not be able to come together on that like most important, most central thing, like raising kids is a vocation, it's something unto itself. And that's why a stay-at-home mother is a job, like it is a full-time expenditure of energy and thought and time to raise a child. And so it's not this like insignificant thing where it's just like, my hobby is ice fishing and mine is reading. I want to be inside snuggled up and warm, and you want to be outside freezing your ass off on a lake. It's not that simple. It's so much bigger than that, more profound, more philosophical in nature almost. And so if they can't get on the same page about this most like fundamental thing that they've done in their lives, that again to me feels like a red flag for their relationship. And that could be a good place to leave off and segue into our next topic, unless you have any last thoughts on this particular episode before I introduce what we're talking about next week.
No, I think that is an excellent place to end this one, because it will move us into our next conversation piece in that series. So I'm fine with wrapping up here. I think that's a really good bow on, the conversations that we've had about Luke as a dad. But tell our viewers what is coming up next and why this is a good segue.
We're going to talk about Luke and Lorelai some more, but mostly their actual relationship as a couple, because once again, I have thoughts, because, everybody has shipped them so hard from the beginning. It's telegraphed from the pilot that they're going to end up together. And it's kind of like one of the few uncontroversial ships in the fandom. but I am not all the way here for it, and it's because of stuff like what we talked about in this episode. So we're going to go into a little more detail about that over the next couple of weeks. It'll probably be a 2 or 3 parter as well, because there's so many little nitty-gritty things in their relationship that can be psychoanalyzed, and you know I love that. So
I had no clue, but thank you for the heads up. In the meantime, if you have had thoughts on this episode and how Lorelai dealt with the news of April's existence, how they broached, shared parenthood, how they did it well, how they did it poorly, please drop us a comment and let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well, especially if there was a bullet point that we missed, that you would like us to circle back on in a future episode. We just love hearing your thoughts. So tell us what you think.
Totally. And last but not least, if you haven't already, if you could hit that like and subscribe button down below. It's real quick, easy, free, and it really helps us out. Don't forget to drop a comment, share this video if you liked it. Don't forget to join us next Friday night for dinner.
Take care, everybody.
Happy weekend.